Start sharing.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'll do a quick welcome. Welcome everyone on the recording and in person. Thank you, Matthew and Brian and Roland, for being here with us. And we're doing this this webinar with Jackie Eshelman, who leads EOV, which is Ecological Outcome Verification, for the Savory Hub that Jackie and I have called AV. And we serve the Western United States, so California, Oregon, Nevada, Washington, and we have a new team member in Idaho. So super excited. And we also work with some folks in Colorado. So we do a lot of work in a lot of places, but call California and Oregon home. So Jackie's going to take us through an overview of EOV to help people understand what it's about and what it is and how it's used. So Jackie, anything you wanted to add before you get started?
I don't think so. I think it's all in the presentation. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen.
Okay. And if you guys have questions that come up while Jackie's presenting, please feel free to put them in the chat. And Jackie, I can surface those to you because sometimes it's hard to see the chat when you're presenting. So, but we're a small little group, so let's make the most of our time together. So please speak up and share your questions. It's the most fun when we all get to participate. So.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt me with any questions. It's totally fine. We like it to be a conversation. So,
Okay.
So this is about our ecological outcome verification, and we have monitors and trainings that go on around that. So I will start by introducing myself. My name is Jackie Eshelman, and we call ourselves holders of AV. Myself, Abby, and another woman, Andrea Malmberg, are the holders of AV, and my portion of the company is stewarding ecological health and regeneration. We are a Savory Institute hub. Savory is a global organization that has hubs in place around the world because we understand that management is very contextual, and so things are very different. Depending on your farm, your ecoregion, your state, your country, it is very contextual. And so in order to be able to communicate well and help people with their management, we work in place. Our work is very place-based. I am an ecological outcome master verifier. And I also work as support for the whole global EOV team. So I support people all over the world in their work in ecological outcome monitoring. This slide will be at the end too. So if you want to copy down my information later, sorry, you guys, I need to do this in a different way. So I'm getting through these better. Okay. So AV, as AV, our statement of purpose is to uplift the voice of the ecosystem in a way that enduring well-being is created by encouraging holistic decisions so that all beings can be the full expression of themselves. And that's truly what we're looking for, is how do we support people, the earth, and our economies to be the full expression of themselves. I'll start with kind of talking about holistic management generally, but today is mostly about the ecological monitoring that we do. But holistic management was developed by Alan Savory, who is the founder of the Savory Institute. And he is a Zimbabwean man, so he is from Africa, and he spent a lot of his life managing land in Africa and learning a lot about the desertification of our landscapes and why and how that is happening. And so holistic management was developed from his insights, from his life's work he was working with elephants and lions and, big game in Africa and recognizing their impacts on the land. And then what happens when those things are not on the land and how the land suffers. So it's basically holistic management is a framework for decision making. And so, we are never coming into a community and saying, this is the thing you should be doing, right? What we do is come in and say, we want you to think deeply about your context and how you want to be in the world and how you want the land to be in the future. And then we work with you to develop a way to make decisions that are appropriate for you in your landscape. We're never making decisions for people. We are always helping people to learn how to make good decisions. And we don't have all the answers. We just enjoy walking with people to the outcomes that they're looking for. So we teach an array of courses, starting with Holistic Management Foundations. We build holistic context, so we have holistic context design. We do holistic planned grazing, ecological monitoring, holistic financial planning, holistic land planning, and then we do monitor training as well. But all of these things are deeply connected, right? We understand the interconnectedness of all things as well as our decision making and how we are within that system of decision making. So I'll talk a little bit about Alan's insights into holistic management. And the thing that attracted me to the Savory Institute was this idea of an evolutionary relationship, right? So Alan began to understand that the landscape was desertifying, that grasslands were desertifying. And in fact, a third of the globe is grassland, and 70% of that is degraded and desertifying. And this is they're all connected. I don't think that desertification is causing climate change, but I do believe, desertification is helping with climate change, but they're all interconnected. And so, we have droughts and floods and fires, and those things are deeply connected with famine, poverty, and war. And so, and it's my belief that is, desertification essentially means we're getting too much bare soil. There's not enough grass and too much bare soil. And so the question is, what's missing? And it's this evolutionary relationship that grasslands, grazing animals, and predators, their relationship is broken. And so grasslands developed and evolved with large herds of grazing animals that behaved in a particular way because of predators. And so what happens is they bunch together and they move across the landscape, and they are safer in their large, tight group of animals from the predators. So the predator tension keeps them in a very particular way moving across the landscape. And grasslands evolved in that situation. And so it's very necessary to their production for them to be disturbed and then left alone for a long period of time. And so if you think about that, the things that our landscapes are desertifying, and it is because we don't have the numbers of animals anymore. We don't have the predators that are making animals behave in the way they should, or in the evolutionary way that they have. And they're also in very brittle environments, missing the microbes that come from the gut of those animals. Ruminant animals digest the grass and ferment it in their stomach. And then when they poop it out, those microbes are then left into the soil. And the other thing that we have now is not a lot of contiguous land, meaning we've fenced off our landscape in a way that doesn't allow wild animals to move through the landscape like they used to. Even if we still had large herds of animals, that would be a problem. So how do we work with what we've got? Right now, we don't have millions of bison moving across the landscape anymore, but we do have a lot of cattle and a need to feed people. And so how do we manage our animals in a way that mimics what the grass needs in its evolutionary timescale? Another one of his insights is this idea of context, and we look at the world in ecoregions, basically. And so there's been a lot of research done about ecoregions, and what an ecoregion is an area of land that has similar land makeup, similar soils, similar vegetation, elevation, topography. And so we've grouped those into sections because we understand that they will behave in a particular way that is similar across that portion of the land. Alan also really understood the difference that brittleness can make. Brittleness is a way to talk about how humidity is distributed across the landscape in the soil, basically, over the seasons, right? So it's not about how much precipitation you get in your area. It's about how it comes and how the land soaks it up. So you could be in Africa and get 200 inches of rain in 2 months, but if your soil doesn't soak that up, then it's not effective. If your water cycle isn't working well, then that rainfall just washes away. And so it's really not about the amount of precipitation, but how your landscape handles that over time. We define it as, on the brittleness scale, you have a 10, and that's like a true desert. And then we have a 1, which is like a rainforest. So where do you fall in that line? I'll just keep going.
And I would say for my Fort Bidwell neighbors on the call that Fort Bidwell tends to be a little bit more brittle tending. So we're in the northeast corner of California, next to Oregon and Nevada for the others on the line. And yeah, it tends to have low rainfall, but not just that we have low rainfall, but like Jackie said, it's in a certain time of the year. And then we have long seasons of dryness, so that we don't have a lot of humidity at the soil surface, so we tend to be more brittle. Just wanted to, yeah.
Can I ask a question there then?
Absolutely.
I know it's very dependent on microclimates and other things, but in general, where do you guys fall on the brittleness scale in general?
They're about a 7. Yeah, they're about a 7-8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're about a 7-8 on the brittleness scale. And this kind of takes us into management tools, right? So brittleness is really important because we know that we have very particular tools that we use to manage the land. There's always human creativity involved, and there's always money and labor involved. But the other things are we use fire to manage the land. We use rest to manage the land. We use living organisms in the form of grazing animals, which creates animal impact on the land. And then we have the use of technology. And these tools are tightly woven with brittleness. So you could use a tool in a very brittle environment and it would have a very different outcome than that same tool used in a non-brittle environment. I'll use fire, for instance, well, actually, I'm going to use grazing animals. Say, for instance, out here in the West, we have, it's more brittle tending, and animal impact has a very different, the way things decompose in a brittle environment is typically chemical. But when you have a chemical, meaning that it oxidizes, the nutrients in plants oxidize and go into the atmosphere. And you can tell that's happening when you see gray, kind of dried out grasses, right? those grasses could be trampled to the ground by an animal, and then they go into the mineral cycle and start working into the soil. In a non-brittle environment, that impact is, I mean, it's almost hard to keep litter happening in a brittle environment because the soil is very active and it eats it up really quickly.
In a non-brittle, right?
That's what I meant, in a non-brittle environment.
Yeah, we think of a rainforest, like something falls on the ground and it's just like sucked into the forest, sucked
Yeah,
into
like a tree could fall in the forest and mosses will grow, and then, I mean, it almost disappears instantly. But in my region and in Fort Bidwell, if a tree fell over, it could be there for 100 years plus, and just turn gray and be mummified there, right? So those management tools work very differently in different brittleness. That's the important thing to understand. And then we think about management, and one of the most important things about decision making is that we're monitoring what the outcomes are. When we think about holistic management, we're essentially trying to plan for what we want. So we have our vision of what we want over here, and then we have this action that we want to take that's going to get us to this outcome. But we want to make sure that we have very short feedback loops, right? So we want to be monitoring everything. We want to monitor our financial plan and make sure we're getting the outcomes that we wanted. We want to monitor our grazing plan and make sure that what we thought was happening is happening. So that's where monitoring comes in. Monitoring is an essential piece of holistic management because we want to make sure that if we're not getting the outcomes we're intending, that we can stop and rethink about what it is that is happening, what went wrong, and how we can quickly change direction. So that's where monitoring comes in, and especially in ecological monitoring, because a lot of our goal is to stop this. I mean, Savory's general overall, I want to say goal, but that's not really it, but their purpose, their mission is to stop desertification in grasslands around the globe. And so we know that our role in that is to help land managers make better decisions and then monitor those outcomes and learn how to do that on their own so that they're able to make those decisions and see what's happening and get the outcomes that they're looking for. So let's get into ecological outcome verification. This is essentially, Savory Institute is a leader in land regeneration around the globe. And so essentially some bigger brands came to the Savory Institute and they said, we have customers that are really interested in getting products from regenerative sources. And so you guys are the people who know the people who are regenerating land. So how do we figure out how to get those products? So they developed a program called Land to Market, who's kind of a middleman between the bigger brands and the producers who have products that are used to regenerate land. And essentially, the Savory Institute realized that they needed to come up with some protocols to kind of ground truth and prove what they said was happening. So that's where the science behind EOV came from. And they developed this to really be for the farmer. EOV is definitely farmer first. Like, we want to help people make better decisions on the land, and we want to use monitoring to do that. One of the beautiful things about our verification is there are many certifications and things out there, but they're very practice-based. And they're saying, if you do this practice and this practice and this practice, then you're regenerative. But for us, you can have a practice, but if it's used in the wrong way or inappropriate way, appropriate time, then the outcomes might not be regenerative. And so through monitoring, and we monitor the outcomes of practices. So we're looking at, okay, you did this practice, but here is the outcome of it. And so that is the big difference. We are kind of agnostic to practices. We understand the things that work and have done enough research to recognize what's working and what's not. But it's always due to context and by being agnostic, it allows us to meet everyone where they are. You can be a completely conventional farmer and we can monitor your land. And our hope is that it would help you see how you could change to more regenerative ways of managing the land.
Jackie, could I say something really quick right here? Because I think
Sure.
this is such an important point. I saw this a lot in Africa where there was programs where they wanted to help communities plant trees. And that was the approach to reversing desertification. And the problem is that because the approach was not holistic, meaning they didn't consider ecological, social, and financial considerations at the same time, the social component was left out of it. And so culturally, there was this mismatch. So that instead of people hauling water for their families or tending to their own crops, they were diverting all their resources to planting these trees because of this program. And it actually undermined the community and undermined their resources. So something with the best intentions, like how could planting trees ever be a bad thing, right? But any intention out of context without taking it can be disastrous, even with the best of intentions. So that's why context is so important to us. So just wanted to share that.
I think that's such a good example of how you can get unintended consequences regardless of how wonderful the plan was, right? If you haven't considered the whole thing, you know, and all of the outcomes you might get from it. You may not get what you think you're going to get. And if you're not monitoring, you may not know until it's too late.
Dang it.
So it's very contextually relevant, down to the ecoregion, down to the very farm, down to the 5 acres you might be managing. So it's very contextual. It's dependent upon you and what you're doing on your land. We have a holistic approach, meaning, you know, there's a lot of conversation right now about carbon sequestration. And we are kind of staying out of that argument because we think it's a little short-sighted to focus so hard on a single little molecule, when that's so hard for people to understand, as opposed to ecosystem function, right? When we talk about the ecosystem processes, we focus more on the water cycle, the mineral cycle, you know, community dynamics and diversity. And then we look at energy flow. How are things photosynthesizing? And so we look at those ecosystem processes because we understand that those are all connected to carbon. Carbon's connected to all of those things, but carbon is a difficult thing to understand. I mean, obviously we understand that you need to pull it out of, we don't want it in the atmosphere, we want it in the soil, but it's invisible. It's not an easy thing to communicate with people. The methodologies that we use are scientifically sound. We have some lead scientists and a whole scientific advisory group that re-look at our protocols every about 2 years. And I think that's fantastic. I really like science, but one of the things that I don't like about it is that scientists tend to come up with an idea and then defend it to their death. And for me, it's really important that we can continue to monitor the outcomes of our protocol, right? If the scientific community changes the way they think about things, we want to be there with them. We want to be able to change our protocols to keep up to date in the scientific community. So that for me is a really huge beneficial piece of this protocol. And then the other thing is that we wanted this to be really doable for farmers. We understand that farmers are at the kind of lower end of income that comes in off of agriculture. And so we don't want to be another burden upon that. Our intention is to come in, do the work that we need to do together, and then, leave you to your, not leave you, but continue to support from afar, right? Help you, but let you take it from there. And so this protocol was developed so that land managers can actually do most of the monitoring on their own. A third party needs to come in the beginning and do the baseline, and then every 5 years, a third party needs to come in and do that long-term monitoring. But the short-term monitoring can be done by the land manager.
Jackie, I got a question on that before you leave the slide.
Sure.
And that the last part of it is it says without losing inferential ability. And so, yeah, typically in order to be able to infer that something's happening, you need a large data set. So is this without losing inferential ability? Does that pertain to individual farmers all contributing their data to a larger database?
That's a great question. The inferential ability of this monitoring actually comes through the short-term monitoring. So that long-term monitoring, and we'll get into this as I go into detail, but short-term monitoring is looking at leading indicators. So these are things that change really quickly, but the data that most scientific communities are looking for comes from our long-term monitoring. So essentially the major pieces of data come from long-term monitoring. And then our short-term monitoring is that inference, right? It's the short-term monitoring that is inferring what is going to happen when we get to year 5. Does that make sense? Because we're not looking at species diversity and functional groups, and we're not looking at and water infiltration and carbon sampling or soil health. Those things take longer periods of time to change. They're lagging indicators of ecosystem function. So we want to keep our eye on this short-term monitoring so that we don't want to wait 5 years to figure out if we're doing a good job. Right? If we're going in the direction we want to go in, we want to have this short feedback loop so that we can change direction to make sure that year 5 is changing, right? So the inference comes from that short-term monitoring.
And Brian, I don't know how familiar you are. I just assume you know all the savory things because you're so engaged, and I love that. But the short-term monitoring is so much data collection. I remember when I go with Jackie, I'm like, she's so fast. I'm exhausted at the end because you're looking at so many different data points, and you have to think, well, where is that on what number is that? And there's so much interpretation, but there's a lot of data that's collected in EOV because we're trying to see entire ecological uplift. We're trying to look at the whole. It'd be really easy if Jackie just went around and collected a bunch of soil samples. It'd be a lot easier. I shouldn't say it'd be totally easy, but there's a lot of data she's collecting. And I think that's where that big data set comes in to get, and isn't it all of the short-term monitoring that creates the ecological health index, that single number that we're looking at to indicate if it's going, it's regenerating, but
up or down, right?
Yeah. And let me find a paper. There's a paper that was written by Dr. Jason Roundtree and Pablo Borelli and others about the ecological health index. So it's peer reviewed. It's that is like the scientific backing of the protocol. So I'll drop that link to that paper in here. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Jackie.
No, and that helps. So yeah, the short term thing, and then it also what's helping me put the inferential ability, because my previous profession had a lot of statistics in it. And so but this inferential ability is informing our management decisions. So on our land, in our context, we take these and we can, from our monitoring that we just did, our short-term monitoring that we just did, we can begin to infer how much of this change was due to the management practice that I've most recently adopted at the tail end of a series of
Right.
management practices. And that's where I can begin to infer from the data I'm collecting. So it's not just being collected and put off on a shelf. No, this is helping me make day-to-day decisions and month to month and year-to-year decisions. Is
Absolutely.
that a way to look at it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is the power of short-term monitoring, really, is the ability to see what's happening and change quickly. So EOV monitors outcomes in biodiversity, soil health, ecosystem function, profitability generally, and well-being. So we really want to pay attention to all of these things because that's how we know that, the whole is healthy. We monitor those things, but essentially we're looking at ecosystem process. So we want to see all of these different aspects going into our work. We want to know that, the plants are photosynthesizing at their potential, that the soil is holding the rain that falls from the sky, that management practices are, getting animals in the right time to the right place for the right reason. And that we're increasing biodiversity in all things, that grasslands are thriving, that they have deep, deep, deep tap roots, then they're perennial grasses, that we're, getting carbon into the soil, that the soil is alive and active, and that we're getting enough impact on the land through animal hooves, dung, and urine. So in EOV for short-term monitoring, we just talked about this a little bit. We look at both leading and lagging indicators for soil health and ecosystem function. In our short-term monitoring, we're looking at the ecological health index. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We look at forage availability and quality. We look at the animal production and the management practices that are happening there. And these tell us that how the ecosystem processes are functioning, what the primary productivity of the landscape is, meaning like how much grass do you have available, how much production do you have, and then secondary production in the animals themselves. How is that grass being transformed into meat or animals, healthy animals? And then we also look at, and those are all leading indicators of ecosystem function. And so that means that those things can change really quickly, which is why we monitor every year. You can see at the bottom of this slide, that is kind of the way monitoring happens. So over time, we start with baseline at year 0. In baseline, we do short-term and long-term monitoring. And then we do short-term monitoring on its own for 4 years after that. And then on year 5, we come back and do that long-term monitoring again. And the reason we don't do long-term monitoring every year is because those are lagging indicators of ecosystem function, and they just don't change very quickly. So if we came out and monitored long-term every year, then there would just be too much data and it wouldn't make a lot of sense, which is why that short-term monitoring is an inference to what we're going to find out in year 5 when we do the long-term monitoring again. So for long-term monitoring, we're essentially looking at the percent of cover by species and functional groups. So how much bare soil do you have? How much of that is plant cover? And what species is there? And what's the makeup of all of that? So we're looking at biodiversity. We also do the ecological health index. We do water infiltration. We do soil carbon sampling if that's something that you're interested in. But more importantly, in my mind, is that soil biology testing, that soil health. So we want to know how active is the soil and how can we support the life in the soil to better feed the plants that are growing from that soil.
I like this, if I can jump in. a light bulb just went off, and I don't know why it took this long to go off, but it did. So thank you. And that is, if I was long-term monitoring it every year, then I'd be looking at I got my baseline established. I'd be looking at year one, and I'm doing long-term monitoring. And so I'm saying, oh, okay, my management practices aren't working.
Right.
And so now I'm constantly changing my managing practice, trying to affect something that's not going to be affected in 1 year. And so now I'm wasting time collecting, and I'm wasting time changing my management decisions
Yeah,
based on that. Okay, that light bulb just went off. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Brian. That's a great point. Okay, so here are the ecosystem processes that we look at. And then on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see each of those ecosystem processes and the indicators that we use to see what's going in that ecosystem process, right? So as you can see on this list, bare soil affects every single ecosystem process. And therefore, it's really heavily weighted in our EHI score, Ecological Health Index score. So on the right-hand side of that graph, on that table, you can see the max and minimum scores that we give for each of those indicators. They're biological indicators. And the beautiful thing about those biological indicators is that it is something that every single person can see, touch, smell, feel, and understand. So it's really important for me to have the land steward out on the land with me so that we are looking at this together and we can recognize the things that we're seeing. And I think that is a thing that really impacts people about the outcomes of their management practices. It's easy to think you're doing the right thing, but how do you look at the soil and look at your landscape to know that that's moving you in the direction you want to go? So the indicators we look at are live canopy abundance. So how are the plants photosynthesizing here? Are they photosynthesizing at their potential? We look at the microfauna, so they're part of the mineral cycle. How are those small bugs and worms and things that we find, dung beetles, how are they affecting that mineral cycle? Are they drawing those minerals down into the soil? Are they, eating up all the detritus and the, leftover litter from dying plants? We look at functional groups. We put plants in functional groups dependent upon how they function in the ecosystem. So we're looking at warm season grasses and cool season grasses. And the reason we put them, and these are perennial grasses, always perennial is what we're looking for. And the reason we put them in warm season and cool season is because they play different functions in the ecosystem depending on how hot it is. Cool season plants can only photosynthesize at their max up to a certain temperature. But then once it gets too hot, they senesce and go into kind of dormancy. And then what we want is warm season grasses coming on because they photosynthesize best in the really, really hot part of the season. So the important thing is that we have this, really good photosynthetic cycle happening throughout the year, or as long into the season as possible. And then even after those plants are done, we want those live roots in the ground feeding the soil throughout the winter. So we look at warm season grasses, cool season grasses, we look at forbs and legumes, and then we look at trees and shrubs. And it is kind of reliant on their role in the ecosystem as well as their root systems below the ground. They all kind of play their different role in that system. Then we look for rare and undesirable species. We look at litter abundance, so how much litter is there. We look at litter decomposition. How is that litter decomposing and incorporating into the soil? And then we also look at dung decomposition, which is part of that mineral cycle. But, you know, in a more brittle environment, you'll see dung that is kind of white and mummified, it's oxidized, and that is a waste of that nutrition, right? We want to make sure that the bugs are there and those things are decomposing and it's getting trampled. And so it's part of that cycle and not just kind of wasting its nutrients into the atmosphere. So dung decomposition, then we look at bare soil and the erosive qualities of soil. So we look at soil capping, we look at wind erosion and water erosion. So those are the biological indicators that we're looking at in EOV monitoring. Essentially, we just want to make sure that we're making good decisions at the soil surface. We want to make sure that, you know, land managers, it can be really, it's a hard job. It's just like, it's a really hard job. And so it's not difficult to spend your days, you know, putting out the hypothetical fires around your place, right? So we want to spend less time putting out fires and more time planning so that those fires don't happen. I love this picture that's on the screen right now. This was a land steward in Nevada, and, you know, we're on his landscape, and he's been there for 3 generations, and his dad and grandpa had been cutting down all of the trees and shrubs on their landscape for a really long time. And now when you go to this landscape, it's kind of a desert. It looks a lot like a desert, and they call it kind of a desert, but it's really interesting. We were monitoring, and we were in the most degraded part of his whole landscape. We were kind of up on this really rocky hill. There was like almost no soil, but I was wandering around, and I found on the north side of the hill, there was all this Indian rice grass growing. And I was like, I hadn't seen it on his landscape yet. So I called him over, and we were like looking at all the Indian rice grass. And then I turn around, and this guy has his like butt up in the air, and he's like dug under this shrub that's there. And he's like, I'm like, what are you doing? And he comes out with these like handfuls like this. And the one on our left, when you're looking at the screen, was, you know, from most, it's like what the soil looked like in the whole area. And then the picture, the hand on the right on our screen was under this bush, and the light bulb went on, and he was just like, this is what my grandpa and my uncle have been doing this whole time. They are desertifying this land. They are, you know, it's by cutting down those shrubs, they're like interrupting the processes that need to happen in the ecosystem. And so for me, that's gold. That is like, when I can see somebody's lights go on like that, it's the most meaningful thing. And that's the cool thing, is like, he now feels like he can stand up and tell his dad that, you know, no, we're doing it this way because look at this. These are the outcomes you get when you leave the shrubs.
I love this example because, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but I love this example because the other message here is this helps remove the doubt. You know, well, what can I really do? What can I really do? You know, well, this photo shows that human action caused these differences. And because human action caused these differences, human action can restore the sameness. And so that can be encouraging, I think.
That is gold, Brian. You're totally right. That is really true. And it's really difficult for us to take responsibility for the management that got us where we are. It can be really hard. So this is actually some monitoring that we did at Fort Bidwell, but this is kind of what it looks like. Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
That's the Fort Bidwell Indian Community Land. It is so gorgeous. But I had the most, you know, I have been thinking for some time about landscapes and why they look like they do. And it wasn't until I was out here on the land with Arnold DeGarmo, who has been working for the Forest Service and the BIA on this land for some time. And so he has a very long perspective of what this land used to look like. And, you know, we're up on this land and he's going, you know, you used to be able to see across this, like you could see across this whole landscape, but now the shrubs are so overgrown that it looks completely different. And in our holistic management understanding of things, this land has been rested for too long. There hasn't been enough animal impact and management on the land to keep all those shrubs down and to make it more of a grassland and an inviting place for wild animals and ecosystem function to happen. So it's not very often that I get to speak with someone who has a memory long enough to know what it could be. And so that was really meaningful for me, because a lot of my work is imagination, because I'm trying to convince people what the potential of that landscape is. And none of us have really seen that. It's not easy to find a place that shows the potential of a landscape because everything is so degraded. So that was a huge learning for me, and I'll never forget that. And so as we talk about imagination, right, this is a landscape. Our business partner, Andrea Malmberg, lives in Union, Oregon, and this is a floodplain, and that she is working to get the braided river system back, right? So this used to be called Cottonwood Valley. Why would they call it Cottonwood Valley? There's no trees. Well, I wonder where the trees went. So anyway, the point is that this is what they imagine this should look like, right? And so when you think about the potential of a landscape, you know, it's really hard to get this imagination, right? Can you imagine this turning into this? I mean, how beautiful. So it can be really challenging to convince people that the potential of the landscape is far greater than what they're seeing now. So through our EOV program, land stewards can get verified. So if you increase your EHI score over time, you can get, the land is verified regenerating. Through that, you can become part of the land to market roster. So they kind of put you on the roster. They show what products you have, and then brands can look at that, and you could get into a relationship with a brand to sell your products if that's the way you wish to go. I haven't even gotten to that part yet, but we are in, I became aware of a seal that the Intertribal Agriculture Council is giving. It's called Regen Nation, and it's for tribal producers. And they have a kind of list of things that they want to see from producers to get this seal. But through our work in holistic management and EOV monitoring, we believe that it would prepare people to become part of that seal as well, if that is a more meaningful way to go for anyone.
Is there a difference between the left and right-hand side on their previous slide where it says verified land to market and land to market verified? Is there a distinction that?
That's a really good question. So you can be verified regenerating like through EOV and not necessarily be a part of the land to market roster. And you can use that in different ways. And I think the really important thing that we mention here, though, is that this seal is not saying that the product is regenerative. It's saying that the product comes from an animal that was used to regenerate the land. So, like, if you grow vegetables, those aren't regenerative products. But if you sell meat or hides or, you know, things like that, it's typically like food, fiber, meat products, fiber, and what was the other one, Abby?
Dairy?
Milk, dairy.
Milk,
Yeah.
dairy. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I just wanted to, it is, I think these two are just, it just is an indicator and a evidence that land to market and EOV continue to evolve, that these programs were started with a clear intention of what we needed to do. And we had to find out how to get there. So from the, like, if we were, Jackie and I, 5 years ago, giving this presentation on EOV, it would be such a different story because it has evolved so much in this landscape that people are trying to figure out. How do we tell the story of regeneration? What is regenerative agriculture? All of this is swirling right now. And what it means, Brian, is that there's a land base that can be verified. That's the one on, like, when I'm looking at the screen on my right, it says this land base has been monitored by someone like Jackie, who knows the protocol, is accredited in the protocol. And yep, it gets the seal because that land is regenerating, that number is going up. On the left-hand side, that's the seal that goes on a package. So it's really for a brand to tell the story to their consumer. So one is for a land base for the farmer to use. The other is for a brand to tell their story to their consumer. And like Jackie said, that mark is communicating that the product inside that package was used in a regenerative system. So the land base that it came from is uplifting, versus like most products that we buy in the supermarket, it was to produce that product was a real extraction from the land base. So that's the story that it's telling. And Jackie, you have to remind me, I feel like in the you're closer to these conversations than me, but in the beginning, the idea was that any product coming off of a regenerating land base could have that feel or tell that story. Even tourism or wine or almonds, you know, anything that was being sold from a land base that's regenerating could be part of land to market. Is that still, do you feel like the way they're going?
I mean, I know we have our seal on, I know they have the land to market seal on some wines.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that one is still happening, but I think we're learning a lot. I think that's kind of where you're going here, is that we're constantly learning and we're constantly figuring out what's kind of working in the system and how, you know, what makes sense. And so I just wanted to bring up that was like a really down to Alan Savory, like just recognizing that he screwed up. So, you know, so many different times, and that's where all this learning came from. And, you know, that's what keeps me so involved with the Savory Institute, is that we're constantly looking at what we're doing and making new decisions depending on the outcomes that we find. And that is just so meaningful to be able to admit that you were wrong and change course. Is everything. So yeah, that's I think it's continuing to evolve.
Right. Yeah, and it's really interesting when you take that approach. Sorry, Jackie, but in this story of how EOV was created and how land to market was created, Savory Institute took that posture that Jackie's describing and then said, you know, we don't know. We know what we want to create, but we don't know how to get there. Will you figure it out with us? And the people who joined are those early adopters, those courageous, those ones that want to forge the path. And so it can be really meaningful, exciting work to the right people if you're really into that space. And that's where you find your place, is in that early creation. And I think that collaborative process creates something that's so beyond what we could have imagined with just a few people pushing something forward instead of inviting and collaborating. So it's been fascinating to be part of and to also to witness. So.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we have an EOV monitor training coming up. It's in Southern California. Lompoc is near Santa Barbara. This is actually the landscape that we will be in. You can see it in this photo. And it is remarkable. This is the third year I've been teaching this course on this landscape. Year one, they had just gotten so this land is being managed by the White Buffalo Land Trust, who is a new savory hub down in Southern California. And the year that I started teaching this course there, they had just gotten control of the management of the land, and they ended up letting the land rest for another season. And I came back last year and was blown away. Like, this same field that you're seeing right here had mustard over my head, like the whole thing. Like, it was, and it was this crazy change that maybe it's not what they were going for, but something was happening, and something really important was happening. And all of these grasses, you can see them, they're so short, they have been overgrazed for many, many, many years. And just one season of rest made all these seeds come in, and like the most amazing thing. And it's like I said, it's not exactly what they wanted, but it was a transition. You can tell, like, I don't always know the answer to why something is happening, but the important thing is that we're asking the question, we're saying, what is actually happening here? Like, this is really incredible. And, some people might see that field of mustard and be like, oh my God, we got to kill that mustard. That's not what we want. But what is better to understand is that transition that nature is making, right? The earth knows what to do. And so I like this description, if we just, take our foot off the neck of Mother Nature for a few minutes, and that if COVID taught me one thing, it is that if we just stopped, nature would fix itself. It would just heal. And we saw that across the globe when everyone just stopped. And the systems that be were always telling us, we can't stop. We can't stop. And then they had to. And look what happened. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. Nature is so resilient.
Mm-hmm.
So the course that we're teaching could open up opportunities for people who are interested. We at IAC just got into partnership with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and we got funding from the Farm Service Agency and the USDA. A Native man is running the Farm Service Agency for the first time. His name is Zach Ducheneau, and he is absolutely fabulous. We went to the IAC's annual conference in Las Vegas and heard him speak, and he put up his phone number on the board for every single person there and he was like, call me. I will answer my phone. He's like, if you need something, you just call me. The head of the FSA put his phone number on the board of 1,000 people. And then every single official after him did the same thing because he did it. It was so awesome. Anyway, I digress. We have a project with the IAC that will be going into South Dakota and Oklahoma over the next 5 years, and we will be working in Indian country. And so we'll be training people there, but there is opportunity for work to do monitoring. We'll be training, we'll be doing all kinds of holistic management education, as well as EOV monitor training. My intention is to train people up in those communities so that they can continue this work. And so the project that we're doing there is really interesting because we're looking at it's called the CRP and CREP programs. They're conservation reserve programs that the USDA or the FSA does, where they ask land managers to kind of withhold land in some cases and manage it in a particular way in some cases. But anyway, our goal is to go in there and look at these programs, how they are operating in Indian country, and the opportunity to change these programs to better serve Native communities and their land management practices. So we are really excited about this work and the potential ability for this to influence up to the highest level how we work in Indian country, how these programs work in Indian country. So we would love for folks to get trained and come help us with this work. And that's it.
Yeah. Oh, Jackie, your timing is phenomenal. I just really appreciate that about you. Look at that, on the nose, 11 o'clock in California. I did want to add too that when you become trained in this protocol, and Jackie is one, I'm not saying this just because she's my business partner, but she's one of the best trainers in our global network. So the fact that she's here is a huge opportunity to get training from her. And it is a global program. So if you have the desire to work in other regions of the country or in the world, or go deeply into your own region, those opportunities are here and they're happening now. Like Jackie, your whole entrance into this was relatively accelerated. Like, you decided you wanted to become trained in holistic management. You had this knack for EOV, and like the year later, you take over a program, and now she's working at the global level. Like, if you have the desire to be in this work and be in this network, you can have a really fast onboarding, and the opportunities are there. Ramiro,
that's one way that the Savory Institute really operates off of personal drive, right? There's nobody in the background pushing. There is no one. And so personal drive is what gets you wherever you want to go. I mean, that's kind of the whole thing about holistic management, right? Is that we want to know where we want to go and how do we get there? Let's plan that out. So, it's a very self-driven organization.
Yeah, that entrepreneurial spirit, that vision, your own holistic context, guiding your decisions is super powerful. And I was going to give the example also of Ramiro, who's a young monitor from Uruguay, and Spanish speaking, English speaking. And he's really, again, like Jackie, just had a knack for this. And he was pulled into projects in Spain and Portugal, and now he's traveling all over. And it can just happen really fast if you want it to. And maybe that's not your style, and that's no problem too. But witnessing this has been like, wow, this can happen fast for people if you want it to. So.
Yeah. And I would also bring up that just specific to Indian country too, like this program that we're doing with the IAC now, there is potential for this to grow far beyond South Dakota and Oklahoma. This is kind of the trial version of it. And if we find that it's successful, there is opportunities for this to spread around the nation, really. So I think that's super exciting as well.
Awesome. So Jackie, if someone did want to go to the training in Santa Barbara, which is an awesome place to be at that time of year, so beautiful. I'm looking out the window, probably Matthew is too, at a bunch of snow here in Fort Bidwell. So Santa Barbara sounds amazing. But what would be the next step, Jackie, if they were interested in learning more about becoming a monitor? Would it be to email you, to reach out to you?
Yeah, I think they can email me. I was actually gonna...
I'll put your in the chat.
I was thinking I should put a link to... Yeah, probably emailing me is the best, and then I can give them the link to sign up to find out more information about it or whatever.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I will. And then Matthew, if you're keen to do it with Fort Bidwell in particular, we have different avenues of making that happen. So definitely connect with Jackie and we can work on that. But that would be really exciting. So yeah, so I will send out this recording to everyone who registered. So if you registered, you'll get this. You can rewatch it. You can share it with anyone. That's totally fine. I'll send Jackie's email address. You have a link to it right there. And then the other links that we brought up in the conversation, I'll send that out too. So that will be probably tomorrow that will actually happen. So you'll have those assets for you as well. So awesome. Jackie, anything you wanted to say in closing?
No, I'm just really excited that everybody showed up, and this is something I am like extremely passionate about, and the course is so much fun. And yeah, so it's like an amazing community. And if you haven't found yourself somewhere in a regenerative type community. It feels so good to walk into a room and just think, oh, these are my people.
Mhm.
You know, these are people who think like I do. It feels really good.
Yeah.
So finding that community was really meaningful for me, at least.
Yeah, that's so true. There's a lot more we could talk about. There's like 7 other things I wanted to say, but I want to respect everyone's time. And please reach out to Jackie with follow-up questions. And again, I'll get all those materials out to you guys in the very, very near future. So have a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jackie.
guys.
Thanks, Abby. Thank you,
Yeah, thank you,
everybody.
Jackie. Yeah, awesome. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.